Meher Baba says, I am never silent. I speak eternally. The voice that is heard deep within the soul is my voice. The voice of inspiration, of intuition, of guidance. When the word of my love breaks out of its silence and speaks in your hearts, telling you who I really am, you will know that that is real word you have always been longing to hear.
Today we are going to talk about what Baba came to do, which is to awaken us. So as we end each day and get ready to go to sleep, if we listen a little bit, we can hear our beloved saying, just whispering lovingly, awake, my darling, awake. Awake to the oneness that is you, the oneness that is all, the one in the many, awake. In other words, awake from the dream of manyness. So Baba came to awaken us from this dream of manyness at a special time, and as we have discussed, at a time when he is assuming three manifestations of the avatar: the seventh avatar, the Kalki avatar, and the highest of the high, or the ancient one, bringing tremendous amount of energy to awaken us in a way that he has not awakened us in many, as he said, since creation. So, and he said that he had not come to teach. He came to awaken. So we know the words, we know that he's come to awaken us to this world of oneness. But what does that mean in our everyday life? How does it translate? What are its implications? What are its kind of nuances? And so, just to affirm what Baba said about his mission, let me read this simple statement by him. He said, I have taken this form to unveil all human beings, that is important, so that they can realize that God is within their own self. God is within all of us. Only God resides in all. And I've come to lift the veil that awakens mankind to know that there is only one reality and all else is illusion. So the key words are for everyone, for all being, and that he is the self of every self. We don't have to go anywhere to find him. He's intimate with us. This becomes important in the discussions that we will have in a few moments. The first topic that I wanted to introduce was awakening us to a new understanding of God. Now, Baba's awakening has changed the way we view God. We now view God the way that mystics and saints view God. The traditional way of looking at God was that God was this distant being or force that sat up there, judged and punished and rewarded and tried to make sure we would behave and everything was just done so right. And so all of the Judeo-Christian religions that we are familiar with, that we grew up with. We're focused on that. Now, it is a shift to thinking about God the way that Baba wants us. He's our own self. He's intimate with us. He's closer to us than our very breath. That he's not there to punish us. He's there to love us. And we are not here to fear him, but we are here to love him and adore him and worship him. And not for a reason. In the past, you had a reason to do that. You wanted to avoid going to hell, you wanted to go to heaven. But now it is for the sake of love alone. You love because it's nothing else to do, because he has awakened our hearts so that we are now motivated to love. Now, we may still think the old ways and say, well, we're, back of our mind wanting God realization, or we want, to get rid of our miseries or whatever it is. But those are just hangovers from our previous conditionings and learnings of eons of time. So why is it that all of a sudden Baba is introducing this new way of thinking about God? What was wrong with the old way of looking at God? Is God no longer a punisher and a kind of looking after to make sure we do everything right according to his commandments? Well, the reason for the difference is that the majority of our work as humans in the past was to wind sanskaras. And we've talked about this at length, but I'll just review it. In the past, we had to learn through the opposite. We had to focus on a certain aim. So we had an aim. And we had to be so intensely focused on it so that everything else was considered wrong and no good until we mastered it. And we would spend lifetimes learning each segment of life through many lifetimes and would finally master it. And each lifetime we would review what we had done and what we had learned in the astral world where we kind of had no body and we were on the other side. And then we would come back and correct our mistakes and learn all the limitations, all the ramifications, all the nuances of that particular small segment of learning. And then it would come back and do the same with its opposite. And we would go back and forth until we had learned all the segments that was to learn. Now, in such a scenario, you need to have some force behind you that says, do it right, learn it correctly, don't waste time. This is the right thing to do. And this religion is the right religion. And all the other religions are bad, and so forth. So there was that need for God, for the force of divinity that is eager for us to become one with him, and that we can't become one with him unless we learn everything, to learn everything. And he would put that force behind it. So that was the image of God that we had. And that was the force of God that all the religions talked about. Of course, all this time, the mystics were a different story. Even in the very early parts of, I know Islam a little better than other religions, there was this wonderful saint Rabia of Basra. She is famous for having said, well, she lived in a brothel, but she is known for this statement that, oh, beloved, if I worship you so I can go to heaven, deny me heaven. And if I love you to avoid going to hell, burn me in the fires of hell. So the mystics, of course, were already awakened, but now Baba is bringing that awakening for the masses to make it available to everyone. And so during unwinding, what happens is that all of that learning during the winding phase is now complete. And now it is the time to consolidate all of the learning, all the opposites, all of the different lives that you have spent learning the limitations and ramifications of each piece of learning. All of that is now integrated and it comes to the surface again. But this time, we have a most difficult job. Force of habits wants us to repeat what we were doing in the past as we were learning, we were winding. A force of habit wants us to rewind, to repeat. And in fact, that was, I think, he had a term for it, the principle of repetition or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he just discovered that people don't want to change. They just want to repeat what they're doing. And so that is what we still have inside of us. And even though we are getting ready to unwind, those habits want us to keep doing it the old way. So we have a tremendously difficult job ahead of us. And the only way that it can be done is through grace, is through total reliance and surrender of everything, good and bad, and all the muck that is inside of us to God, returning it to God, because we have now completed that learning. That is part of our consciousness, that has done its job. And now it is time for it to integrate, unify, become one. So all of these discrete pieces of knowing have to now be unified. Because as we have said, unity has no meaning if there is no diversity. To have unity, oneness, and to experience it, we must first have the experience of diversity in the fullest possible way. And it is that energy of the learning of the diversity that pushes us towards the unity. And again, this unity can only be achieved through this intimate relationship with divinity. Now he says, awake, even if it's just for a little while, as it said in that poem, knowing that, we can grasp for just so long and then our grasp kind of lets go because it's not strong enough. But as we do grasp as much as we can for a little while at a time, gradually our grip becomes stronger. And finally we can hold on and to that state of wakefulness. So we all have these moments of aha moments of realizing that what Baba is saying is true. And so he's just asking us to grab onto those moments, try to prolong them, try to remember them, and know full well that he is right there doing it. That it's not us doing it, it is him doing it. And to the extent that we don't see that unity and we feel ourselves separate, he says, okay, I will help you. And so his help is there. It's immediate. It is It is so immediate. It's just, and it is the force of love. This awakening is happening through the immense love that he has released. And this love is everywhere, within reach. And it's just like air that we breathe. All we have to do is to kind of pay a little attention to it. And we say, oh, yeah, we are breathing. But of course, we can't do that all the time. But if we do it enough times, then it becomes automatic over time. So, right, so we are unwinding both the good and the bad. And the only way that we can unwind, that we can surrender, we can no longer kind of follow the old habit of winding, is to ask his help and to know that he is doing it, and that anything good or bad that surfaces, and they will surface, both good and bad. All the kind of good qualities that we have developed over eons of time will come, not to be attached to those, same as the bad ones that come to the surface. And all of those, Baba says, give them to me, give them to me, give them to me. So it is important that people do that when it is their time of unwinding. During winding, we need to strengthen the ego. We need to go after, with zeal and prejudice, after small pieces of learning. So another part of it is this universal nature of the awakening that Baba has talked about. I know that I have difficulty remembering the statement that I read at the beginning, where Baba said, he's come to awaken mankind to know that there is only one reality. In other words, it is true that we see different groups, different beliefs, different levels of awareness, but they're all part of a single unity. So if God is everything and everyone, then when he releases that wave of awakening, it's not going to be partial only for these people or for that people. It is going to be for everybody. But being conditioned by duality, it's hard for us to. We need to take a moment and realize that his awakening is for everybody, regardless of what level of, if they're winding, if they're unwinding, if they're astral world, they're in the subtle world, wherever they are. This strong force of awakening has hit creation, has been brought down, and is going to impact all. So there's no partial awakening. It is awakening of everybody. It's a universal awakening. So it's not surprising that these days we find all manners of people and persuasions being awakened in their own way. And they're being awakened to the same idea that Baba is awakening his lovers, which is that he's bringing in a monumental change to the principle of unity. And they even use the same words that we use. And it's, and of course, now that we have YouTube, it's easy to go and find all of these things. So the awakening is energizing all of creation, and not just the unwinding process. It's giving the unwinding process a great push through, and that will become the primary mode of being. But all the other existing parts of divinity, of this unity, are also being pushed. You find scientists speaking like mystics. I mean, literally, if any of you are interested, you look at what quantum mechanics is talking about, what dark energy and dark matter are all about. They're basically talking about the same principles that spiritual people have always talked about. The whole unity of existence, the unity of creation. Science is talking about Gaia, about all the different ways of looking at this unity. Astrologers. Astrology is also another dimension that is honing onto this wave of awakening and saying the same words. And they're even saying that the changes that are coming are so big that even the interpretation of astrology is going to change, that astrology itself is going to change. And then you have people who channel from the astral world, and they are saying exactly the same thing. So, but it is important for us to not kind of get carried away by these similarities that we find, because Baba has come. It used to be that spirituality was at the astral level. For eons and eons of time, spiritual students would learn to kind of get into the astral worlds and to bring down energies from the astral worlds, to bring down knowledge and so forth. But that's no longer the case. Baba is pushing things up to a much higher level. And so even though one finds that those who are still learning at the astral level are echoing the same things that Baba is saying, we have to keep in mind that, just as Baba said, let them do it. It's wonderful. It is all part of Baba's work, but not for those who are following Baba. For those who are following Baba, we have Baba. So we stick to him and we surrender to him, because we don't know where it is that you're supposed to go, but he does. And he will take us there, and he will use us to aid the rest of creation in the way that he wants, as long as we align with him, with his teachings, with his focus, and with what he wants. Not that the others are wrong. They all have their own place and they're all doing the right thing. They're wonderful people. I just marvel and love some of these figures that I see speaking about, I don't know, yoga, about all kinds of things that used to be things that we all did in the past. But now, Baba has pulled us and awakened us to his own personal pathway. And so that is why he was so clear about us not wavering and sticking to that. So those who are unwinding, as we have talked before, go through, it's an elaborate process. You don't kind of suddenly get up in the morning one day and start to unwind. It takes lifetimes to get ready for it. After you have completed your winding phase, the sanskaras that are to be unwound need to be loosened, need to be shaken and kind of made loose. And that takes several lifetimes sometimes. And those are very difficult lifetimes, because full of conflict, full of anguish and stress. But it is the energy that is being released through that stretch and conflict. It is like, rubbing two things together and generating heat. It is that heat that will loosen the sanskaras, and then when the time comes, they can be unwound. So that process is going to be happening more and more. It's going to become, at sometime, the main way of being. And so these discussions are important for those who are sensing such a period or approaching such a period. Now, what does awakening have to do with intuition? Because Baba said this is the age of intuition. He's bringing a new way of knowing that he called intuition. And there are many different understandings of intuition. And I'm going to share a few here based on what I have gathered. So during unwinding, what happens is that all the experiences of the past begin to come together. So these experiences have brought to the soul knowing, understanding, some very deep knowing, because now they're balanced. The person had lived both ends of the spectrum of duality. And in living each one, the person has understood its limitation of both of the two ends of the spectrum of duality. So during the winding phase, we experience duality to the fullest possible extent, and that learning doesn't disappear. That becomes part of the conscious knowing that we have. And everything, as you know, is coded in sanskaras. And so all of that knowing is with us. So when we get to the phase of unwinding, one of the things that helps us not repeat the winding exercise is this cumulative knowing that we have from having experienced both ends. It is an unconscious knowing, but it is a knowing that pushes us towards a higher, a more divine way of handling the conflict, the problem, the issue, the personal interactions that we find difficult, the challenges in life. We draw on that unconscious knowing because it's all there. And so that is one way to think about intuition, because intuition must help one get closer to the goal. And so it is not focused on the little self. It is focused on the big self. So it is aligned with the goals of the big self, the one without a second. And so some people think of intuition as, I don't know, finding a parking space or investing properly or, things of that sort. That may be in their mind the way that they can think of intuition, but there's another way of thinking about intuition, which aligns with the unwinding process. And so during the unwinding process, in addition to divine grace, there is this inner knowing accumulated through the experience of the opposite that allows us to intuitively know which way to go that would benefit the big self. So that means that it's not necessarily going to benefit the little self. That might find that the little self gets into trouble if we follow our intuition. And that, what the society considers as good and right and this and that may not be achieved if we follow our true intuition. I hope that's clear. And maybe if it's not, maybe we can have some question and answers about it. So in other words, it's this unconscious knowing that we have gathered throughout our experiences that becomes the motivation. And that motivation gives the direction to to what we do. And that can be called the intuition. It's the highest knowing of love that we can muster. Okay. So it's not concerned about the lower self. It's an approach in a way that best pleases God, that best aligns with the goal of life, and that best interests our real self. That which comes out of intuition does those. So it may be detrimental to the lower self. Another thing is that we may think that, okay, intuition has nothing to do with the intellect, and that we don't need to go, study and learn our trade and learn how to live a, worldly life and all of that. On the contrary, without having learned that, we won't have full intuition, because it is the accumulation of all of our knowing. And part of our knowing is what we can learn through our intellect, through our reason, and all the skills that we can learn, and all of the mundane ways of knowing that we have. All of that becomes part of that intuitive knowing. Another way of thinking about intuition is, we've spoken about this kind of early on during our sojourn. I introduced it in the context of evolution, and I said that during evolution, we find that we have all these, it begins with these disparate pieces of existence, like atoms, let's say. They each live independently. But then there's a force that brings them together, that brings disparate things together and unifies them. And this is the force of love. And of course, there were two quotes from Baba saying how love exists even at that level, that the attraction of the positive and the negative forces are an expression of love. And so this force of love begins to bring, atoms together, make molecules together, make cells together, make multicellular organisms and plants and animals and human beings and so forth. And during each of those phases of integration, we have suddenly things that felt separate become a single unit, and each of those separate cells now begin to sense their existence as part of this larger whole. So the cells of our body now consider themselves an integral part of this body. When there were little cells, they were after their own welfare and procreation and existence. But now that they're together as part of this larger whole, they cannot think of that role anymore. They want to help this bigger piece. And we talked about how a white blood cell sacrifices itself for the well-being of the bigger whole that he's now part of. And so, as human beings begin to awaken to this sense of unity, they need to have a faculty that allows them to know how best to serve this larger whole that they now have become part of, that they feel they're part of, this bigger unity that they're now considering themselves. And that sense that allows them to think of the bigger good, to think of how they can serve this larger whole, can be called intuition. In other words, again, it is in the service of this bigger self, this bigger whole, than the little self. And throughout evolution, these sense of sacrificing as disparate pieces become unified is well studied and known by scientists. Like in trees, in a forest, the roots collaborate with some have a symbiotic relationship with some fungi that allows them to communicate and to help all of the forest. If they, shoot, for example, nutrients to the small saplings who don't have tall enough leaves to capture the sunlight. So there are certain plants that, if they are infected by a caterpillar, they create a certain chemical that induces these caterpillars to become cannibalistic and eat other caterpillars. And other trees begin to pick that up. And so this sort of a communication exists throughout, like the ants. The worker ants are known to sacrifice themselves for the betterment of the colony. Bees, the same way. So as we get to the human beings, we will begin to see the same natural motivation when this love awakened, when Baba awakens this sense of unity, where we begin to not feel isolated as individuals.
I just want to know for my own knowledge. So intuition exists in every level of existence, but it is only when we reach unwinding, the unwinding of sanskaras, that we truly get to feel it more and understand it, or how does that actually resonate?
Good question. Yeah. The way I described it was that Baba talks about intuition as this new sense that allows human beings to feel oneness, to draw on their past knowing, to serve the big self. But the same motivation, which is love, exists at lower levels. It is called instinct. It is called reason. It's called chemotaxis. It's called other things in lower rungs of evolution. But when it comes to human beings and this new wave of awakening that Baba is bringing, it is called intuition. Baba calls it intuition. It is the same force, but it's now functioning at a new level, at the level of allowing human beings to feel this oneness with each other, as we call them, barodari and barovari in Farsi, we say. And he actually translated that, the brotherly feeling. That's Baba's term for it. So in essence, it is the same force of love, but it manifests and is called different things at different rungs. It's not called intuition when, a bacterium is drawn to a food particle. It's called chemotaxis, you see, and or the instinct or reflexes. These are all ways that lower forms of existence experience that same force.
I think we have to pay attention to differentiate between what is going on in our mind on what our heart is telling us to do, not to fall into trap.
Very good. Yeah, that is another description of intuition. It's what the heart tells you, because the heart knows based on all of what you have learned and what divinity has put on your plate over eons of time to learn. And so, and that becomes what we call, unconscious knowing, or the knowing of the heart.
Yeah. Thank you.
Beautifully put.
Farhad, for some years I've been trying to understand what Baba means when he talks about critical reason or critical thinking in a discourse called Qualifications of the Aspirant. And yet when I hear Baba people talk, often they go directly to intuition and feelings and leave out critical thinking. And you've mentioned a little bit about how reason fits into this. Could you say something more about critical thinking?
Yeah, very good point, Jill. Because as you say, often people think that when Baba says intuition, that means you throw away everything else. Well, you can't throw everything else. You have your instincts, you have your reflexes, you have all the chemical reactions and chemical forces within you that have held everything together. And you also have your reason. And that's why it's critically important to develop your critical thinking and all the skills that go with it. Because intuition cannot function without that key element, just like the body cannot function without hydrogen bonds at the level of the molecule. It is part and parcel of nothing is a throwaway, in this creation. Everything that we have learned, every maturity that we have gained, it will be put to full use as a new level of awareness or knowing dawns on us. And so as intuition dawns, then critical thinking will be key, just as key as anything else is. Very good point, Jill.